Hello, Tom Levecki here with a very special on the fly edition of the New Theory podcast. And we're also going to aggregate to Mobsters Inc., Twitter, and I think our Facebook page. With that being said, I got a very special guest today. We went for cigars, we had a nice dinner. He actually didn't want to come on the podcast, but I convinced him. We got Tony Delgado, whose story we're going to go through today. He's never told this part of his life. He's a public figure, got millions of followers online, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever that is. And he's here today. Anthony Delgado, how you doing today?
Mazel tov. Thanks for having me, Tom.
Salud. So, Happy New Year to our Jewish brethren. And we're starting off with just a little splash of Blanton's. Those who know. And we're going to jump right into it. It's called The Block to the Boardroom. And Anthony said I could ask you anything?
Anything. Nothing's off limits.
All right.
But we're going to delete this stream, so you got to watch.
So this is a one-time only thing.
One time only.
Unless you hit the super thanks or super chat button. All right. So with that being said, Anthony's father growing up was MIA, street guy, and got put away for, unfortunately, life. He's trying to get him out. We'll talk about that in a little bit on the end of the arc. With that being said, street guy, I cover all this stuff. You guys know this. You know my interviews. We always talk about the guy who, my father was this, my father was that, and they kind of like get into the life, or they peter out, or they don't really do much for themselves. Anthony's the exception. Millionaire, business owner, entrepreneur. We're working on some deals ourselves. That's why I was meeting with him today. But more importantly, I want to start about how he went from the block to the boardroom. Anthony, again, welcome to the New Theory podcast.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah, I mean, I hope if anything, sharing some of the things we're going to share, it can just give a little spark of hope or light or inspiration to somebody that's out there growing up in the inner city. I grew up in a neighborhood where you had gang members, you had Bloods and Crips and Latin Kings and all sorts of shenanigans happening in the streets. And we'll talk a little bit about my father and his street life kind of past. But again, I never used that, never allowed any of that stuff to define me, right? I allowed those things to give me motivation, right? Give me a reason to say, hey, no, I'm not going to go down that path, and I'm going to, change my life and put my destiny in my own hands. So
we got a special guest in the chat, Jeff. I'm going to drop the link now. Obviously, you're listening in. You probably got stuff cooking. You're going to like this one. You're welcome to pop in at any time. I know you're going to have some questions because Anthony's a good guy, successful guy, but his path wasn't so easily formed. So we're going to jump right in. So your father grew up Italian mother, father Spanish guy, right?
From Puerto Rico.
From Puerto Rico, and was a street guy. So give us kind of like you were early, young kid. Father wasn't around. He's always in the streets. Give us kind of your perspective growing up, and what was your life being the son of a street guy?
Well, yeah, I mean, growing up, I had no idea of anything my father was doing. I just thought he worked construction, right? That's the thing that everybody says, right? And he would show up and bring me toys and bring me presents, and it seemed like I had the perfect life. And then when I was 5 years old, he disappeared and just started showing up via phone calls and letters. And so the story that I was told as a kid was just that he was working. He was working and he was going to come back soon. And, he would call from time to time and I talked to him over the phone, but I had no idea that he was actually in jail and facing life. And then eventually he got sentenced to life in jail for drugs, for narcotics trafficking. And, it was the early 90s where they had just put all those really harsher laws together. Before that, you would get caught with drugs and, it was kind of a slap on the wrist and people would come out real soon. And the crime bill of the 1990s had just taken effect and they threw the whole book at him. They threw the whole library at him. And I think they had offered him 25 years. And for him, as a guy that was in his 20s, that looked like a life sentence. And he said no. And he took it to trial and he blew trial. And they ended up giving him life with no parole and basically no options. So as you mentioned at the top of the show, we're going through the Trump compassionate release route, and we're trying to get him out that way. And hopefully we just put in an application. Hopefully he'll be able to get some compassionate release that way. He's been incarcerated for 30 plus years now,
Yeah.
and he's an old man basically
Yeah.
at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically my whole life I just grew up kind of in the church and in the neighborhood, and never really knew this side of my life until I was a teenager, and kind of found out the hard way.
Yeah, but so here's the thing. So I've interviewed many people. Interviewed Pablo Escobar's wife, Toto Dina's son, people that like you hear, these big names and that kind of stuff. But what you don't hear is that one guy who went away, or the street guy, or the gangster. You don't really hear about the family, and when you do, it's a lot of the time a cautionary tale. So give us about when you fully understood who your father was, how did it affect you, and you had that fork in the road. Anthony like did kind of like hang out, did some things he was not proud of, but then eventually went correct and became like a multimillionaire. So give us unpack that for us.
Yeah, sure. So, like I mentioned, I really didn't know what was going on with my father until I turned 12. So I had met my grandfather from Puerto Rico. He used to take me to Puerto Rico every couple of years for the summer. And I would go and spend time in Puerto Rico and kind of connect with my roots and like that side of the family. And then when I was 12, I started using the internet and started Googling, well, how much is a plane ticket to go to Texas? Because that's where my father was, right? And I still don't know he's in jail. So I'm talking to him over the phone. I'm like, hey, I looked up the plane tickets, and it's $300 to get a plane ticket round trip to Texas. Like, if you want, I'll fly out there and I'll go see you, right? And then that next year, after I asked that question, I was in Puerto Rico. We would go with my older brother and work out in this shed. There was like a workout shed kind of gym on the top of a mountain. So we would go every morning, go work out, and we're there and we're working out. And then he starts telling me all these crazy stories about my dad. So he's telling me, oh yeah, well, one time your dad was on the phone, on a payphone, right back then in the 80s, it was payphones, on a payphone, and a guy comes up, crackhead, and tries to grab his chain. And this is in the Bronx. And he turns around, looks at the guy, and as soon as the guy sees the look in my dad's face, he says, oh fuck, I fucked up, I grabbed the wrong chain. So he lets go of the chain and starts running. And then my dad pulls out a pistol and just shoots the guy, and you see the feathers from the guy's jacket going in the air, right? And it's, oh wow, I didn't know any stories about that, right? I never heard stories like that. And then he tells another story how my dad was like involved in some shootout, and the cops come and they barricade the street. It's like a one-way street, so they park the cop car to like block his way. And my dad gets out of the car, pulls out a big Tommy gun automatic, and the cops are like, whoa, 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 calm down, calm down. They get back in their cars and they reverse, and they actually just let my dad go because they didn't want to get into a shootout with that big gun. They have little handguns. They don't have those big automatic guns, whatever that my dad had. So keeps telling me all these crazy stories about my dad having guns and doing all this crazy stuff. And then he finally just gets to, the conclusion of the story. He's like, hey, and that's where your dad is. That's why your dad right now is in jail and he's doing life. And at first it hit me kind of like a little bit of an identity crisis, right? Because I just thought I had the perfect life, going to church, growing up, like I said, in a neighborhood that was very diverse for sure. But, like I said, I grew up in the community, going to church, going to school. I kind of thought that I had the perfect life. And then like that, in the blink of an eye, I found out that like kind of things weren't what they what they seemed. And, in the beginning, I kind of thought that, oh, maybe I need to go down this path. Right. So I had a mixture of emotions between like, number one, maybe I want to follow in your father's footsteps, but then number two, I don't want to make his same mistakes. So, I got involved with some less than kosher things. I mean, I sold pot in high school and did some silly things kind of along the way. But every single time that I would get in trouble, I would always just think about him and think about, oh wait, I don't want to go down that same path. I don't want to make the same mistake, right? And I really think that did help me in a way to keep myself off the worst path, right? I kind of danced with the devil a lot of times, and I dabbled in a lot of different things. But I always knew that I wanted more for myself. I wanted more for my son and my family later on in life. And, and I saw kind of the destruction that it did to my brothers and my family and, my mom. It actually all started to make sense, right? My mom used to cry at night when I was a little kid and I could never understand it, right? She would just lock herself in the bedroom and cry. And I would have to go in and bang on the door and say, Mommy, what's wrong? Right. And, it never made sense until it did. Right. But I always kind of used that as a warning to, hey, I don't want to repeat those mistakes.
Yeah, sometimes you learn based off of what you don't want to do versus what you want to do. Meaning, oh, I want to be that guy versus, and then maybe a certain level of motivation versus, I don't want to end up like that person. So it's kind of like even more of a motivation in that sense.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it, I mean, he gave the ultimate sacrifice, which was his life.
Yeah.
So it's like no amount of money is worth that. Whatever money he was making from whatever
really
he was
quick,
doing.
So we're gonna draw some parallels. So kind of right now, you and I have worked very hard to where we had, where we got to where we are now. And I look at like street guys and mob guys and all that kind of stuff, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, for a few $100K a year, whatever they're making, that was even back then. Now it's not. It's like I'm not gonna give up my freedom for that. I can drop ship. I can do internet.
Well, the best quote,
yes, and make $1.70.
50 Cent's movie, 50
Yeah.
Cent's movie, Get Rich or Die Trying. They have a quote in the beginning. It says the average drug dealer makes less than minimum wage. When you calculate the legal fees and the time behind jail and all this stuff, and you calculate it, you're making less than minimum wage. So it's like, it's really not worth it,
Well, so I always ask this or think about this. So your father, obviously one of those kind of did what he had to do stories versus yourself didn't see as worth it. What is the disconnect, or what? Like, I gotta think how to say this. Why do you think your father thought the way you did, and then how were you able to unpack what he did, and then you took a different path? So let's first wear his hat.
Well, so you have to have compassion for your parents. I think a lot of times we always think, oh, if it was me, I would have done something better or X, Y, and Z. And that's really just going to lead you to a lot of frustration, and it's not really productive. You need to realize that your parents, whatever generation that they grew up in, it was different than the generation we grew up in.
So
right?
you're empathetic, like
he didn't have the internet.
No, but like
he didn't have half the opportunities that I have, that all of us have that are doing this, right? That are listening to this message. He wanted to look for opportunities, and I talk about this now. If people follow my content now, how like my ancestors had to go from Europe to Puerto Rico to New York because they were looking for the opportunities. They're like, where's the opportunity? I have to go find it.
Correct.
And now you don't need that. Now you have the internet. Like, there's just so many opportunities to start a business and to do things. Whereas back then, I mean, your options were a lot more limited.
Yeah, but so they're in our generation,
and you didn't have the information.
Yeah,
you couldn't Google stuff and just figure it out. You had a very small amount of information, and you were given the cards you were dealt, and people played the hand that they were dealt.
Yeah.
And so for anyone to judge their parents, our parents just grew up in a completely different time and had so many different opportunities than we do. And even if they wanted to do better or learn more or become enlightened, like, how would you do that? Going to a library? And then where do you start? Which book do you read? Right? Where do you even freaking start to try to learn how to make money, learn how to change your circumstances?
Yeah.
It was just a lot harder than it is today.
Yeah.
So I try to look at it through that lens of like, it's almost like pre-internet is like caveman time. And it's like, so how am I going to judge my dad when he was in a place where those were the choice? He grew up in the South Bronx. He had access to certain parts of information, and those were the rules of the street. And the world was a lot different back then.
Well, so hold on. And Carlos, if you want to give it a few, the links there, you're welcome to jump on. Carlos is a fellow Rican in the house.
Mazel
So
tov, Carlos.
he's part of the No Fly Rican crew. Good guys, Lou and Nelson. I'm playing phone tag with Nelson. So if you're watching Nelson, I give you a call. But with that being said, though, what part of you, though, in our generation, we father differently than our kids? We just do, right? We have to.
Yeah.
But what part of you, and maybe I'm projecting, you feel like when you talk to your father next time, or if you ever have it heart to heart with like that, I get you had to do what you had to do, but what the fuck? You did it at the expense of our family. So is there ever a part of you that felt that way? And if so, how did it affect you? Or did you like, no, did not feel that way and just moved on? Because I want to kind of get, okay, I want to unpack that.
So I saw my brother experience a lot of that resentment, and
Blanton's. Sorry.
Yeah, it's good.
David asked what we're drinking.
Yeah, I witnessed my older brother kind of go through a lot of that resentment, and I saw that it really wasn't healthy. It didn't really serve him.
Yeah.
So I tried really hard, really not to have resentment, and just try to come from a place of compassion.
Yeah, but hold on, this is important. Right now, you're a little younger than me. Did you get there recently as a mature man, or did you get there earlier? Because I myself probably got a lot more forgiving for my father when I've had kids, and now 4 kids. I have a family, and although I didn't agree with any of his choices, at least somewhat understand. Yeah. When did you reconcile that?
So for me, honestly, my frustration didn't really manifest as anger for my father. It manifested as anger for the system.
Okay.
So for me, it was the government who was keeping my father away from me. It wasn't him, because when he was here, he was buying me toys all the time and showing up to my birthday. Like I had the video of him at my last birthday when I was 5, and I would replay that video and pause the part where he was there. So when I found out that it was the government that took him away, I would fantasize about renting a helicopter and going and taking him out, right? So for me, it really manifested as a resentment for the system, which is, like I said early on, I was selling pot. I did a dissertation in high school about why pot should be legal, all this stuff. I was like ahead of my time. Like now it's fucking legal in all the 50 states. But yeah, I got into a lot of trouble because I was selling pot and promoting it, talking about it in high school, and definitely got me into my fair share of trouble for kind of going against the system. And I actually still hold those beliefs, right? Like I think all drugs should be legal, whether they're medications. I feel like if you're an adult and you're 18 years old, you should be able to go to CVS and buy any freaking drug you want.
Interesting.
And I don't think that they should be regulated the way that they are. But after getting in trouble enough myself, I came to the realization that just because I want it to be that way doesn't mean it is that way. And I need to operate under the laws of the place where I live, right? Yeah. So back when I was a kid, weed was legal in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
So the conclusion that I came up with was, if I want to sell weed and be a marijuana entrepreneur, well, then I can move to California where it was becoming legal, or I can move to Amsterdam, right? But for me to sell it in a state where it's not legal, keep getting in trouble, and then blame the system, well, that's just stupidity, right? That's not going to serve me. So I got in trouble a bunch of times. I went to jail. I got in trouble more times than I care to remember. And I remember hitting a point where I was spending more money on lawyers and bail and all this stupid stuff than I was making from the drug business. And then I was running legitimate businesses online that were way more profitable.
You're like, what am I doing?
And I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I spending time on this? So again, it wasn't like a moral decision of hey, I want to stop selling drugs because I think it's wrong. It was more practicality of saying, first of all, financially, this doesn't make sense. And second of all, even if I don't agree with the laws, like I still have to follow them. And it took me a really long time to get there. I went years driving without a driver's license, because I don't think you should have to have a driver's license either. Right. But just because I think you don't need a driver's license,
shout out to libertarians,
doesn't mean you don't need a driver's license. Right. I can feel that. I can have that a belief, but that doesn't mean that I can operate in the world and then have to suffer the consequences,
All right,
right?
so I got to interrupt you a second for 2 parts. First, Carlos said old school code, not many left now. Is there a part of you, you kind of touch on it with the empathy, but is there a part of you with his little pride that he stood, 10 toes down? And also tell us about how he got caught. He didn't get arrested. He got snitched on.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely a part of me that I do believe in some of the old school things of not snitching and integrity and honesty and some of those old school values. And yeah, and my father did not get arrested. He didn't get caught. Someone was transporting uh, drugs over the border. Some other person.
Yeah.
They got caught, and they blamed my father. And they said, "Oh, I work for my dad." Now my dad denies that, right? And he's denied that to this day. And they offered him 25 years. He said,
Wow.
"Screw you." He said, I wasn't bringing this across the border. It's he said, she said. And he went to trial. He exercised his rights to have a fair trial, which I think everyone should have the right to
he also
exercise.
paid trial tax, which is a whole nother discussion. That's why, like Jeff Canarsie, if he's watching, he could tell you, like he studies Pacer and different trials. It's like, hey, I'm going to offer you this, but if you go to trial, it's going to be worse. So you exercise your constitutional right for a fair trial.
Yeah, they're extorting you out of your right to a fair trial. It's crazy. And they ended up doing the same thing to me in a much smaller sense later on. They forced me to cop out to something that I didn't want to cop out to, and my own lawyer was telling me, "Oh, you got to fucking take this, or you're gonna go to jail forever, or whatever. They're gonna give you the max." So yeah, it's definitely a corrupt system. But again, you have to learn the game, the rules of the game, and the sooner that you can learn them and play by them. Again, if you want to smoke weed, go move to Colorado, go somewhere where it's legal, but don't do stuff that where it's illegal and then get mad when they throw the book at you. So I learned that early on in life. And then on my particular case is pretty interesting. They forced me to cop out to 3 with a 1, right? So it's basically, for people who don't know, it's a 3-year sentence, but you're mandatory to do a year, right? And there's a supervised release thing where you can get out a little bit sooner, whatever. So they forced me to cop out to this, right? It's less than 1 gram of marijuana we're talking about. Yeah. They charged me with like conspiracy.
Meanwhile, there's 3 dispensaries opening in my town.
Oh yeah, now that's what I'm saying. I was like 5 years too early to the party. But yeah, they sent an undercover cop to my store. I had a clothing store. Sent an undercover cop to my clothing store. And no, he was trying clothes on, and he said, "Oh, do you know where I can buy some weed?" I said, "Oh yeah, let me give you somebody's number." I gave somebody's number. He bought 1 bag of weed from the guy, and they charged him with conspiracy. Yeah, they charged him with conspiracy.
So hold on. So you start to learn when you have money,
and I had already made the decision to not engage in selling weed anymore. I had already made that decision. I already made the decision to be legit. I opened the store. I was selling stuff online too. So I had already changed my life, and they still sent somebody in to come and mess with me.
All right. So Carlos wrote earlier, you broke in the cycle. Successful. We'll get into that in a minute. How did you break the cycle? Because a lot of times it's a cycle, continues over and over and over, and there's a hamster wheel, right? Guys into life, kids get into life. But you broke the cycle. How did you do it?
So, like I was talking about, I catch this charge, and at that point, I don't want to go to jail.
Yeah.
So I go on the run. So I sign my plea. I cop out, and they say, "Come back in 30 days." And good, I'll see you there. And then I go, and for like 5 years, I have this thing hanging over my head that at some point I'm going to go in, right? And what that did,
there's a warrant for that.
Yeah, it's a warrant.
You evaded a warrant for 5 years.
Yeah. So for 5 years, I'm living in upstate New York, and I go to the supermarket, I'm happy as can be. I'm like, oh, you motherfucker, I'm supposed to be somewhere else right now.
Yeah.
And what that did is it actually trained me to live an extremely law-abiding life, because I knew that one slip up and I was going to go in. So yeah, I lived for 5 years. I started multiple online businesses, right? Unemployable in every sense of the word, right? Didn't want to get a real job. But started online magazines, did digital consulting, did all a bunch of Wi-Fi in a dream type of stuff. And then eventually I did have to go in. And like I said, I went in and then came out on like a supervised release thing. And then while I'm on supervised release, you have a stipulation that you need to have a job. So this is like the first time that I was actually forced to have like a real 9-to-5 job. I had worked some kind of day labor shit when I was 18.
So you can't, at the time, you couldn't say, hey, I have a online business.
Nope, they don't care. You go back to jail, you want to have a business. It was illegal for me to be an entrepreneur. So you had to have a W-2 job or you're going back to jail. Yeah. So I got a job in IT. I'll never forget this. So all the guys that are in my situation, no, that area, yeah. Secaucus, New Jersey, was where I got the job.
Sorry.
And so all the guys that are in this program, they're working at McDonald's, they're working at Dunkin' Donuts, they're working at UPS, and I'm like, dude, I'm not trying to work like one of those jobs, right? I did that when I was 16, when I was 18, driver. But like,
I wish I could be a UPS driver. Anyway.
Yeah, I think they're making good money now, right?
$1.70.
But I was like, I want to have an office job, right? I want to be, at least if I can't be an entrepreneur, in that sense, I want to be working in the technology field. So I go to Craigslist and I copy and paste my resume to every single job in the IT section. Every single, I don't even read the descriptions, right? Every single job, I'm just boop, 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 boop. And then I think I applied to be like the CEO of a company, and they called me in and they're like, hey kid, I don't think you can be the CEO, but we like your resume anyway. We want to hire you. So I worked with them for about 2 years in like corporate IT. Worked with a lot of big accounts. And then as soon as I was officially off the supervised release, I jumped ship. I went to another digital agency. And then I think the real way how I broke the cycle.
That's the one that went bankrupt?
The agency? Yeah. Yeah, they closed their doors after like 15 years. And no, shout out to them. They gave me a lot of clients afterwards, and I still got a good relationship. But the real way that I broke the cycle, to circle back to your question, was I got outside of my environment. And I think that's the key. If there's anybody that's listening to this and they want to know how to break the cycle, is you can't stay in the same town where you're from.
Good point.
That's the poison that I see. All my old friends, like they're still on the same block, on the same corner, on the same place. And it's like, even if it's a good neighborhood, you're going to have a small perspective. Your perspective is going to be very limited if you're in the same place as you were in kindergarten. So when I had that job in IT, I did a business trip to California. I went to Silicon Valley, and now I'm meeting people that work in Microsoft, that work in Amazon, that they're getting funding. Their companies are getting millions of dollars in funding. And those light bulbs are going off in my head like, hey, whatever they're doing, right?
Why can't I?
Yeah, why can't I? Why can't I raise millions of dollars for my tech startup? I know how to code. I know how to make websites. I know how to use the internet, right? So it was in those trips, in those investments, right? That conference, it was a 3-day conference. It was $1,000. It was more money than God to me at that point. It's holy shit, $1,000 for 3 days, right? Plus the hotel, plus the flights, right? And but I made it work. I think I stayed in an Airbnb that year. And I went on to actually getting sponsored by that company. Years later, it's Twilio, right? Years later, they've paid for my events. They're publicly listed on the stock exchange. They brought me on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange when they went, ring the bell and all that shit. But that happened because I took a risk very early on and went out to California to go to an event, right? went and invested $10,000 in a coding program, right, to continue my education, went and invested in all these other seminars and courses and trainings to always try to better myself and get out of my comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
People are so stuck in their comfort zone
Yeah.
that it's like, oh, go to a seminar and pay $1,000 to learn about public speaking or to learn about leadership. No, that's crazy. I'm not going to, I'm already a leader, right? I'm already perfect. I don't need to better myself. And I think that the real key to all my breakthroughs is being willing to like get on a plane and just go somewhere new. Go to South by Southwest. What's going on in Texas? I heard that there's entrepreneurs there. What's going on in Puerto Rico? What's going on in Colombia? What's going on in Mexico? Right. We just joined another program. I just dropped 50 G's on another business program, right? And flew out to the middle of nowhere to go meet with entrepreneurs.
Was that the Montana one?
The ClickFunnels people.
Yeah.
And I'm going and meeting with guys that their companies are getting valued for billions of dollars now, right?
So hold on. So I want to unpack that a little bit because I'm a fence sitter on that because on one end I'm like, yeah, you got to do the Tony Robbins or the different stuff to kind of better yourself. I love Patrick Bet-David. There's people that I follow, so I value the input. But then the other end, I kind of say, and I invest in myself when I can, when I have the money. But then the other part of me is like, just fucking go on YouTube. I'm just giving you kind of where I sit.
Well,
so unpack that for me.
If you can afford YouTube and that's all you can afford, then fuck it, do YouTube. Do YouTube until you start making some money, right?
Yeah.
I invested in this $50,000 program just as an example because I bought a $10 book from the same guy. I read the book, I implemented what was in the book, and I made millions of dollars from that book.
Got it.
So now at this point, I'm like, okay, yeah, first of all, I'm just going to pay it back. And second of all, if I got all this value from investing $10, then hey, what happens when I invest some more? But more than just the money part of it, right? My main point is geographically just getting around different people.
And being that
there's free meetups.
Having that energy.
You can go to Eventbrite or meetup.com and there's free stuff happening all the time. And that's what I used to do. I used to go to hackathons and meetups and any event. There are student passes for a lot of these conferences, right? You can apply and say, hey, I'm a student, or etc. Right? But that's the real hack. It's getting outside of your comfort zone, getting outside of the town you grew up in. Stop hanging out with the people that you knew in kindergarten. That's the thing too. Think about it. Your friends when you're in kindergarten, you don't choose those people. You don't get to choose them. You just show up to kindergarten and those are the people they put you with. But as an adult, as a young adult, you get to choose who your friends are, who your circle is, right? You get to expand yourself. So it's not necessarily about, hey, let's go. Everybody needs to go buy a $50,000 program.
But it's the point of investing in yourself. Hold on. Ask you, give us 3 books that anybody watches on the stream or the replay that wants to further their career or get into entrepreneurship. Give me 3 books they need to read ASAP.
48 Laws of Power.
Robert Greene
is a great book. Yeah. If you want to learn about leadership, communication, those types of things, 48 Laws of Power is very, very influential.
By the way, I've been in contact with Robert Greene's people on and off for the last 2 years. I just keep getting blown off. My goal, he's my dream guest, by the way. Him and Malcolm Gladwell. But anyway, keep going.
Another book that is much thinner than 48 Laws of Power is The 4 Agreements.
Oh, what's that?
So The 4 Agreements, it is the religious, semi-religious kind of spiritual ways of looking at life teachings from the Aztec Indians.
Interesting.
And he breaks down basically these 4 principles of living life. And it'll kind of reframe the way that you look at relationships and other people. One of the things that they teach you is basically to not take things so personal. I think what ends up happening in life is that we add a lot to what's happening and we make it mean things that it doesn't necessarily mean. And so the way that they describe it is that like everyone's living in their own dream. And so anything that they communicate to you is really about them and actually has nothing to do with you. So we tend to take everything personal. And if I say, hey, you're ugly, you're fat, you're this, you're
Yeah.
that, you take it as it's a reflection of you. But the person that's telling you that is probably the person that's the most subconscious about their own weight.
That's really a reflection of themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fair. What's the third book? Because I want to get a lot more questions for you.
So I think the third book, I'll give you something a little bit more business and practical. I would say Traffic Secrets from Russell Brunson's a really good
Russell
one.
Brunson, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. His whole trilogy is really good for practical internet marketing. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so and one thing about Tony, I got to tell you, is, he's been a friend for years. I know him for years. And at first, I met him when he was in Newark. He wanted to really develop Newark as kind of like the next Silicon Valley or Alley, like New York. And he started to. You rented a place, you set up shop,
Yeah.
and he started getting inroads. And then he saw a frontier in Puerto Rico. There's a tax advantage. Kind of built up Puerto Rico as kind of a tax play. Did really, really well. And then now moved to Miami. And I got to be brutally honest with you. And I'm going to give you a compliment. I'm going to give you kind of something I was always envious of, but I also didn't really understand. Where I like the fact that you pivoted, like you didn't just pivot, like you pivoted like a full 180 many times. So that part I love. The part that I struggle with is I'm a little older, got kids, like, he's at my house, picket fence, the whole bit. It's hard for me to pivot because if I pivot and I screw up, I'm fucked.
Yeah.
So walk us through, when do you know when it's the time to pivot? And number two, give us old guys advice on how to pivot when you are a little older with responsibilities.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, it's different parts of life or different seasons, right?
Yeah.
So I was able to make stronger pivots when I had less to lose, right?
Yeah.
I can be more risky.
Yeah.
So, advice to anybody who doesn't have kids and doesn't have that responsibility of a family,
right?
take advantage, man. Take advantage, because you can sleep on the sofa.
Yeah.
You can do the Airbnb thing. Like, you can do a lot, but you can get a lot more risky and a lot more scrappy when you don't have those responsibilities. Now, that being said, just because you have those responsibilities doesn't mean that you can take risks. They just have to be a little bit more calculated, right?
Correct.
So one of the things that has given us a lot of security and the power to kind of even take these risks with a baby, and people are looking like, hey, this looks a little crazy.
Yeah.
Is number one, we're really quick to turn our liabilities into assets.
Okay.
Right? So what ends up happening is most people, their lifestyle grows with their income, right? So the more money they make, then they get the bigger house, they get the bigger car.
Lifestyle inflation.
Yeah, lifestyle inflation, and I'm guilty of it, right?
Oh, so much.
But when those things have happened in my life, and I'm making those decisions, right, to move from Puerto Rico now to Miami, right? We quickly turned liabilities like our houses and our cars into assets, and rented them out, turned them into Airbnbs, turned them into properties, and not turning them into a drag that's going to pull us down, but rather a float that's going to keep us up, right? The quicker that you can diversify and have multiple streams of income, the better, right? Just my magazine provides like a full-time income, and that's just one small part of my income, right? I have multiple things. We have real estate bringing in income.
Yeah. How many streams of income? We don't have to say what exactly they are, but how many streams of income do you have?
Probably about 4 or 5. Yeah,
and I got 4 or 5.
Yeah. So, and then that gets back to the other thing, is it's not about how much money you make, it's about how much money you keep, right?
Good point.
So being able to pay yourself first, being able to get money off the table and start creating that emergency fund, right? Like, I could stop working if I wanted for a year and I'd be fine. I don't want to do that. I like making money, and it's fun. But we have put together a good war chest that allows us to take the risks
Move
that
stuff
we
around.
are,
Yeah.
move things around, place big bets when it comes to the company,
Yeah.
host these big events. I was telling you, we spent like, 6 figures on the last event.
Miami,
And
right?
we're able to do that. Yeah, in Miami. And we're able to do that because we put together a really good war chest. And that helps us, make those types of decisions. But you also have to do what's best for the future version of yourself. And I see so many people making decisions based on where they are right now in this second. They're making the
Yeah.
decision for like me today or tomorrow.
Not good point.
And you want to make the decisions for the next 20 years. I mean, I'm planning for where my kid's going to go to college, and I'm planning for where am I going to be when I retire. And like, I'm really on a 20-year vision when it
Yeah.
comes to a lot of stuff. And then you touched on something else too. I'm really quick to let go of things that don't work.
Which
Right.
I'm not. I'll drive it into the ground, maybe because of ego, but yeah.
Yeah, no, if something's not working or it's not serving me, and maybe it served me really well in the past, well, that's fine. I can be grateful for the value it's provided in the past. And I'm really quick to move on. It's actually your job as an entrepreneur to kill your ideas. And it's the ones that you try so hard to kill and they don't die. Those are the ones that you got to stick with. And 99% of the ideas that pop in your head, it's your job to stop yourself, try to talk yourself out of doing them.
Interesting. So okay. Thank you guys, Tom. See. So because I want people to learn. We talked about some books. We talked about how you want to break the cycle. Um, you and I are both a little heavier in the digital space. You're in the learning space. Somebody watching, right? At different age spectrums. But let's get a little older. Let's go 40s and up, right? Where should people, if they want to make extra money or get into entrepreneurship or start their own business or have extra income, give us like a few areas that you like for them to get involved with today.
Well, it depends again what age you are, and then also your financial situation, right? If you have,
I want to do different brackets. I want the $40,000 guy, regular job, good guy, 2 kids, wants to kind of make an extra 2-3K a month part time and is willing to put the effort to do it.
yeah, definitely. So I think learning any type of digital skill
Okay.
is crucial. It's never been easier to make extra money online.
Yeah.
And there's
But
just
I want to, like, we like to be very detailed on the podcast. Is it like, and the funny thing is, like, Carlos or whoever friends that we have here, like, I hear like, oh, learn SEO. Oh my God, I don't know that stuff. SEO is very easy if you take the time. So why don't you give some specific examples? Digitally, what can they do? SEO. What would you like for people to look into? Let's say somebody's watching now and is like, you know what, I'm ready. Give us kind of unpack that to where they can go digitally.
well, yeah, I think starting a social media consultancy or a digital
Yeah.
consultancy is the best bet. And the good part is you don't need to learn SEO. You can just
Yeah.
partner with someone that knows how to do all these
Good point.
things. And then you focus on being an evangelist and just preaching it and bringing it to the local businesses in your community and people that you know and have known you for years.
Yeah.
And tapping into those people who own businesses and want to figure this stuff out.
Okay.
But yeah, starting a SMMA, right, a social media marketing agency, it's probably the number one way to generate cash flow. If you're making 40K a year, you threw that number out. I think everyone's goal in life, at a bare minimum, should be to make 10K a month. There's kids out there that are 18 years old that are making 10K a month. So it's very doable. It's very possible. And I think 10K a month is that sweet spot where you start getting enough breathing room to kind of stop focusing on what you need and start focusing on what you want.
Good
Right.
point.
Before that, you're really stuck in the rat race. It's harder to save money. It's harder to plan financially. Right. And it's still possible, right? At any income level, you can live below your means and you can start saving. But you want to have that war chest. You want to have that firepower. You want to have, that
So
money.
cash is king.
Yeah, some cash that you can make those decisions. And so the sooner that you can get to 10K a month, the better. You can start out with retainer clients. I was talking about this at dinner yesterday. It's like, get a client that you can help in some sort of a way that it's recurring.
Yeah.
Right. So video editing is like a really big thing right now. Right. There's all these long form content like this podcast. Right. We're going to need to edit this podcast up into clips. Yeah. Well, there's software and there's freelancers and there's ways that even if you don't edit the videos yourself, there's ways that you can provide that service to people that need it. Right. And you can say, hey, I'm going to charge $1,000 a month. Well, you get 10 people to do that. Now you're making $10,000 a month from that service, right? And that's really low-hanging fruit. So figuring out a way that you can be a facilitator to digital services is a easy way to get involved in this whole digital space. Yeah. And rather than going out and trying to start your own business, your own online business, which is really hard, connect with businesses that are already successful. They already have the cash flow. You tap into a portion of their cash flow. Now you're helping them, right? You're helping them do these things that they don't know and they don't understand. And again, you don't have to figure it out all yourself, depending on your skill level. You can just connect with the right people that do know.
Yeah. Now, David has a question, and I like this question. How different is marketing to a very niche market versus marketing to the masses?
The riches are in the niches. Yeah. So you want to focus on a niche, especially in the beginning. Yeah. And
become a specialist.
And become the specialist. And then you start learning tricks of the trade that you can then apply, right? So if you have a client that's a coffee shop and now you have 20 coffee shops all throughout America, right? There's going to be things in the marketing that are repeatable. There's going to be some secret sauce that you discover along the way that really only applies to coffee shops. And then the coffee shops are going to tell their other friends who also own coffee shops in other towns, right?
So you get into that niche versus I'm in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, as opposed to going to every single business in Scotch Plains, do the 2 coffee shops in Scotch Plains, and then get the coffee shop in Westfield, Cranford, Clark. So go by niche versus by area or by mass. I agree with that.
Well, and then you can do exclusivity. You can say, hey, we only take one coffee shop per town, and then you start to branch out that way. But yeah, I mean, it's never been easier, like I said, to get to that 10K mark, which is where you really start to get that freedom and that breathing room.
So I want to go to the next tier. So we talked about the 40K guy or gal. Now let's say the 80K person in a professional career or to trade where they make, 80K. They're making good money. They have a house. They got some kids, but they want to elevate things, right? Where they might have a little bit more resources financially, but less time. What are some of the areas that maybe they can dabble in?
Yes, and then once you have excess capital and you start building your nest egg, then you're going to want to deploy that capital into investments, into the stock market, right? So that's one of the things that we teach, we focus on at Latino Wall Street is building out a financial plan. And you want to make sure you're maxing out your retirement. Yeah. You're going to want to make sure that you're taking advantage if your company has a match for 401k and all those different things.
Or a SEP for you self-employed.
Yeah.
I got into SEPs way early. I'm way too late, but way too late.
Doing an IRA or a Roth, right? If that's available to you, depending on your income bracket. And then just really creating a financial plan. If you're buying a house and you have a family, you're going to want to get some term life insurance so that if God forbid something happens to you, the family gets the house and the bank doesn't get it. Grant Cardone always tells this story how his father worked his whole life to get this dream house, and then his father passed away and the family loses the house, and it doesn't stay in the family for even one generation, right? That never would have happened if he would have had life insurance, right? So getting a policy that is the exact same term in years as the mortgage will ensure that house stays in the family. And it's so funny because the bank makes you get insurance for them.
Correct.
They force you to get a policy to cover their ass.
So why not?
But why don't you have a policy to cover your own ass?
Yeah.
So as far as building generational wealth, that's a big thing. Another thing is putting your kids on payroll, right? The way the tax code works in this country,
like $13,000.
Yeah, I think they just raised it to like 16 now. So 16,000 a year. You can transfer to them tax free, write that off. And then you can put it in a Roth IRA. With a Roth IRA means you already paid the taxes on it, which means all the gains are not taxed. So now you can start buying Apple stock in your kid's name. It will grow tax free for their entire lifetime. And they're able to take out the principal whenever they want, completely penalty free, and they're able to take out the rest at retirement. But it's completely tax free. So imagine being able to have that foresight and say, "Hey, I'm going to invest in Apple for the next 50 years." Or if you would have invested in Apple 50 years ago, you'd be a billionaire, right? So that's a really big strategy. Is now start doing wealth planning with your kids, and then I guess you're going to give me another bracket, and we can talk about more advanced strategies.
So this is the one that's
but that's everything an 80K guy can do.
So I remember I was in corporate and we're sitting around with really talented people, and I would say everyone at the table was making, which is very good money, 250,000 a year, right? So at this table, let's say all a channel of 150 to 300, but average 250,000 a year. And one guy said, "You know what's holding us back from making $2 million a year? 250,000, because we're making really, really good money, and it's scary to walk away from that.
Yeah,
to try to make 2 million, right? Like imagine telling your aunt, your mother, your brother, your wife, I'm gonna get rid of this corporate job where we have a car, income, notoriety, 3 weeks vacation, insurance.
Yeah, you got the golden handcuffs.
But I have this. So what do you do to that guy who's doing pretty well? And you know what? Like, when do you start to think, hey, you really have the idea, the financial resources, and really the opportunity to make that $2 million a year and abandon that $250,000 job? What do you say to that guy or girl?
Yeah, so I mean, you touched on a huge thing, which is having those golden handcuffs, and it depends on what phase of your life you're in, right? If you have a family to support, well, you might take that decision a lot more serious than if you're like a single crazy guy. But my advice for someone in that situation, I actually had someone, um, one of my clients who came to me in a similar situation recently, where he's working for a really big bank, has the stock options, has like $1 million in stock options
Yeah.
he'd have to walk away from, and multi 6 figure crazy job, right? And what we ended up creating together was a way that he can start his business now on the side
Smart.
and keep the main hustle. And financial freedom, I mean, that's another thing I just want to touch on. More than 50% of millionaires work a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
So if you have a really good corporate job, it's nothing to be ashamed
There's
of.
nothing wrong with the slow brick by brick grind.
Yeah.
That you get to $1 million net worth, or between assets, liabilities, and that you're a working millionaire. I don't know, like, the fact that anybody would ever even besmirch that in any way is just ridiculous.
Yeah, but the culture has made entrepreneurship really sexy. Like, oh, great, I want to be Gary Vee. It's not sexy. I mean, you can end up getting sued.
Yeah.
You can end up making millions and still breaking even at the end of the year. So it's not necessarily the thing for everyone. I would say if you have a passion for something,
Yeah.
and it's your passion that's pulling you away from your job because you want to do something else, that's entrepreneurial, then that's great. But if you're having a great job with great benefits and you're maybe on track to be a millionaire, maybe you just need some financial planning. You may not need to start a business, or you can start a side business and maybe have a spouse help you, right?
Well,
and that's the importance of having a supportive spouse.
I don't do like mentoring formally or consulting. I just don't have the time. I know there's big money in it. Probably should, but the formula I give to people: if you have your side hustle and you love doing it, you need to replace your income by 60%. So when you can walk away, you have full time opportunity to make up for that 40%. Something you line to, or your formula a little different.
Yeah, no, definitely. You want to not just jump out of the helicopter without a parachute.
I'm taking people all the time. I'm making 250, and I got my first $12,000 sale, and I want to go all in. Well, how much you make the last year over this new job? Well, 15,000 part time, and I'm like, well, you can't live off 15,000. Get to 180 80,000 and then drop your old job because you'll make whatever 60% is.
Well, you know what's another interesting thing, and I found this with the baby, but you could have this same thing happen by keeping your 9 to 5 job. If you keep the 9 to 5 job, it'll almost force you to be more of a business owner
Yeah.
because you'll have to go out and hire people to run the business. Whereas
Correct.
if not, you end up working in the business, like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and then
Yeah,
I'm going to pack all the boxes and take out the garbage.
correct.
And it's like, whereas if you take that 15,000 in that scenario
Yeah.
that you made in profit in your side business, now you hire the assistant.
You also have less profit. What's profit? The criteria, because if you're working full time, and maybe you only need to make 10% net profit, whereas if you're working there full time, you need to make 40.
Yeah, you
and
can
your
invest
margins-
100% of the
correct,
business
correct.
back into that business to grow it and really build a business, because that's another trap in entrepreneurship is you don't build a business, you build a job.
Yeah.
A job where you don't get paid, right? Where there's no guarantee that you're going to get paid. I tell this to my wife and my mom, who are both entrepreneurial, and I've told them both the same thing at different points in their lives. Like, if you had a boss who was doing this to you, you'd quit. You
Correct.
wouldn't let a boss make you work on Saturday and Sunday. You wouldn't
Correct.
let a boss, do these certain things, but you do it to yourself because you're the entrepreneur.
Correct.
So that's another trap is to ensure that you, not to say you don't have to put in the work, but ensure that you're putting other people in place to take that load off. And we did that very early on in our business.
Real quick, Sons of Italy, good man. Hello to you, sir. Why do businessmen and partners take out insurance out on each other? Okay, I'm going to answer real quick, and then I want you to answer. So, well, generally, and it's rare, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I don't know any 50-50 partnerships. Generally, somebody is a majority owner, majority principal, and they kind of either run the business or they own the majority of the business. So if you run a business with a partner and they're the key person, you can take key man insurance, or that's what it's called, or key person insurance now, 2023, right? Key man insurance. And what that means is if Anthony and I are partners and I own 80% and I get struck by lightning, and I'm core to the business and principal, then my wife or family will get $250,000 or whatever the policy I take, because I lost my earning potential, and then he kind of can take over the business or and run it and get a higher salary, whatever's worked out with the family, or an equity can kick in. But my answer to that is key man insurance, but I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, that's a very common tactic is taking out insurance on key
I don't have the right
business owners, but it can even be key employees. It can even be normal employees.
Yeah, you could take it on
Walmart takes it out on all their employees.
Really?
So yeah, every Walmart employee has life insurance. So if they die on the job, there's money that goes to Walmart, and there's also money that goes to the family.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow, learn something new every day. We'll be wrapping it up soon. I'm going to drop the link if anybody wants to pop in. Big G, really happy to see you. 111. We're watching the Giants on Sunday.
Thanks, Ryan.
Good show. Ryan's a good guy. What a host and guest. Thank you. Is that really Steven? Or
no?
I really appreciate that, and I know Anthony does as well. So this was a special one, because it ties in Mobsters Inc., New Theory, what we've always done, where we had somebody who was behind the 8 ball and then really worked around it to build a strong life. And the truth of the matter is, I've interviewed so many guys, and it's like, oh, my father, and we know this. Father absence is probably the biggest predictor into having to being set up for failure. So we get that. We all get that. But the same token, it's not an excuse, right?
Yeah, we got to break the cycles. You got to break those generational curses, and that's why it's really important for me in my life to be there for my son.
Yep.
And to set the example. And yeah, no, it's definitely not an excuse, and there's this quote that I love. Oh my God. In life, you can either have your excuses and you can have your reasons for why things aren't turning out, or instead of having those reasons, you can just be unreasonable. right? So you can just look at the world from an unreasonable, aggressively optimistic point of view and say, hey, no matter what, no matter who my father was, no matter what neighborhood I grew up in, no matter what, that I have friends I went to high school with who were doing life in jail and who shot, killed each other, joined gangs, all that crazy stuff. No matter those circumstances, I'm going to be unreasonable. I'm not going to use those reasons to validate my failure, but rather I'm going to be unreasonable in the face of that history and those facts and say I'm going to be successful in spite of it. And it's not a reason that I need to go down that path. If anything, it's a reason why I should know better, right?
Good point.
And and it all goes back down to education. Unfortunately, I feel like our educational system has failed us. Definitely in the public school system, but even in the private school, they're not doing too much better. I bounced around between public and private schools my whole life, and they don't teach you about taxes. They teach you about all the different triangles, but they don't teach you how to write a check or how to buy a house or invest into real estate. They don't teach you no financial literacy is being taught. Definitely not at the high school level, and even at the college level, stuff is not taught. And that's why I've had a passion for alternative education, both in my private life and now a lot of the initiatives that we're doing and workshops and seminars is like, how do we get this information that is almost hidden, right? You look at the Vanderbilt family, the Rockefeller family, right? These dynasty billionaire families, and that information is passed down from generation to generation, but it's not taught in school. So the more that we can make this information available, the more that we can make it cool, right? That's another thing. Growing up, being smart, I was called a nerd, right? There was all these derogatory things around being smart, whereas I had to hide being smart, because if not, then you're called a nerd and you're called these things, right?
Yeah.
And our culture kind of demonizes being intelligent and making money, and being informed and educated, right? So the more that we can not only bring the education out, but make it cool, right? I think the bigger impact that we're going to have, right? So like our last event in Miami, we had all these celebrities and reggaeton artists and musical artists and fun things to really make it more like a rock concert than just a business seminar, right? So I think the more that we can bridge that gap and make entrepreneurship and business cool, the better.
I love it. So we're going to wrap it up. Final words. Give us the best piece of advice you ever had as our parting thoughts.
Believe in yourself, because nobody else is going to believe in you.
I like it. I like it. Tony, thank you for being on the pod.
Hey, thanks again.
He's Tony Delgado.
Mobsters, follow me on Instagram, Tony Delgado. And I hope to see you on the other side.
Ciao.